The 86-year-old Bonnet Carre Spillway's state-of-the-art design at its early 20th century opening stands the test of time, but progress often has a cost. DeCondra Norwood looks back at the history of the community lost in flooded history.
A marvel of engineering. The Bonnet Carre Spillway sits about 30 miles north of the heart of New Orleans on the Mississippi River in St. Charles Parish.
The land usage was good, so from an engineering perspective,
there were two crevasses or breaks in the levee near the area in the late 19th century.
They could capture that portion of the river and manage the spillway between here and Lake Pontchartrain.
A place in the winding path of the Big Muddy where nature was already trying to break free.
Many are familiar with the rushing waters protecting lands downstream, but the land that we stand on right now holds a hidden history.
Even after those massive floods, Mont's was a thriving community.
A lot of the whole area was in use, yes, until it became a spillway.
The tract of land, now periodically flooded, once housed at least 4 plantations, even well after the Civil War. Many of the formerly enslaved still worked the land where they had been born, lived, and died.
It's the Roseland Plantation, the Pierre Ross Hermitage Plantation, who toiled on this land, and that's how I really came to the conclusion and realization that my great-great-great-grandfather was buried here.
Christopher Smothers' journey into his family history led him to the United States National Archives.
I didn't even know the records existed.
Following the stories of his 86-year-old grandmother, he took a chance and discovered a treasure.
John Brown was the father of Douglas Brown. He was born approximately 1835.
He was a soldier in the United States Colored Troops, fighting with the Union Army for the promise of freedom.
Fortunately and courageously, my ancestor John Brown and many other relatives felt that this was their opportunity to attain liberty.
These Civil War veterans' stories detailed in affidavits from the soldiers, their widows, and friends in pursuit of their rightful military pensions.
It's very emotional. You can interpret the pain in their words, you know, how they really, really suffered.
The hundreds of pages of written accounts lead back to this land. In a deposition from March 1903, Lydia Brown says, "I am the widow of John Brown, who served in the Union Army about 3 years. The soldier and I were slaves of Pierre Ross and lived before the war at the Ross place. After the soldier was mustered, he came to the Ross place again, and we lived as husband and wife until he died." Pierre Ross consolidated the plantations in the area. Some land was eventually sold to the Kugler family. On the National Register of Historic Places, that name identifies one of the 2 known burial grounds marked only by a boundary of white metallic strips in the floodplain.
The oral accounts tell us that there were markers in this area. I don't have a sense of the way they were, all the markers were aligned.
The other is labeled Kenner, after its last landowner.
Here would be the burying ground for what we understand to have been the enslaved community at the time, starting during the antebellum period and continuing through the life of the plantation.
There are accounts of burials right up until the time the federal government started work on the spillway in 1929.
Not making any apologies for it, the world was a different place in 1929.
The living were displaced, but the graves remained. Through the Bonnet Carre's 1935 dedication as the first flood control project completed in the post-1927 mission to tame the Mississippi. A carnival-like celebration with President Franklin Roosevelt visiting in 1937, the same year of the structure's first opening, likely spreading the first layer of alluvial soil that began the cemetery's erasure from this landscape.
Yeah, many years spent trying to find that narrative, you know, trying to find answers for my grandmothers. You know, they were really robbed of a lot. You know, it's kind of like, not only did it kind of help me build a connection to them, but it really gave them closure for a lot of the injustices they witnessed in their youth.
These are field rows. What we're doing now, which is protecting and maintaining the areas, and then there's a preservation in place plan.
It's part of archaeologist Jason Emery's job to manage the effects of the United States Corps of Engineers operations on cultural and historical resources in this region.
We do monitoring of the cemeteries after operation to ensure that there's no additional damage.
In recent years, after the floodwaters subside, a team of archaeologists and Corps personnel inspect these properties to make sure the water didn't disturb the graves. But for 40 years, the sacred ground had not been treated as such.
There was a 1975 discovery of human remains along this corridor.
Human bones, artifacts such as an Oddfellow Society crest and a stone fragment that appears to be part of a military headstone of a U.S. colored troop veteran, were unearthed in the eastern plot known as the Kenner Cemetery. That led to an extensive archaeological survey in 1986. In 2012, the Corps held public meetings contacting descendants of what they believed to be anywhere from 150 to 300 people buried in the known areas.
The 1975 human remains are scheduled for reinterment as we move towards a master plan and reinterpretation.
These are people's ancestors, whether they know it or not.
The Corps revealed a plan to create a space honoring the lives once lived here as part of a grand plan for the spillway. Nearly 10 years after that public input, the cemeteries are still nondescript plots in a vast field, and those disinterred remains remain in storage.
There needs to be an official landmark designating the sacredness of this area.
Part of that effort with the master planning started in 2010, so we're 10 years down the road from that. I think what I understand is that there's some legal challenges associated with our authority to be able to do some of the things that we'd proposed, but honestly, I don't know the answers to that. In the end, we can get back to you on that. I think, and I support it.
There are lives here, people who sacrificed their lives here.
The people buried in these now unmarked graves sacrificed their strength to produce the sugar that fueled this economy long before the oil.
They have names, and they should be honored, as with any other person of value.
They sacrificed years away from loved ones to fight with the Union Army in the Civil War.
And there should be a collective effort to try and honor them and recognize them.
And now they sacrifice their final resting place to the swirling waters of the overflowing Mississippi. Nikandra Norwood, Fox 8, Local First.
As to why there's been no movement on the 2012 plan for reinterment and redesign of the grave sites, a Corps of Engineers spokesperson said the Bonnet Carre master plan is a long-term guide for future management and advancement of the spillway's recreational, natural, and cultural resources. The currently proposed master plan includes new features that require additional authority and funding before it can be finalized for implementation.